Pantheon is Busch Gardens Williamsburg's newest and best roller coaster. It's a multi-launch coaster by Intamin. It's actually the park's third multi-launch coaster, following Verbolten and Tempesto. And the way things are looking, it will not be their last either. For years, I've been saying that Busch Gardens Williamsburg had a strong coaster collection. All the rides were good, but nothing was outstanding. Pantheon, I think, is that outstanding roller coaster. Is it perfect? No, and we're gonna get to that. But I'll tell you what, they did a lot of things right. So let's go over some of the stats here real quick. We have a height of 178 feet. That is not the top hat, that is the vertical spike. It's the tallest point of the roller coaster. You reach it by accelerating backwards, and it's a pretty impressive moment. Kind of reminiscent of Mr. Free's reverse blast at Six Flags St. Louis and over Texas. I personally wouldn't say it is better than those spikes. If you've experienced those, you know that it kind of holds you there. Before releasing you, it's also a lot taller, but this is still an excellent moment. Our steepest angle of descent is at 95 degrees. That is with the top hat. It's great to see a beyond vertical drop at Busch Gardens. Track length, 3,328 feet, but a couple of those sections you go over more than once, which results in a longer ride time. If Pantheon didn't have those backward sections and no spike, this would be a pretty short ride. But actually, I think the ride time is pretty good here. Our max speed is 73 miles per hour. Busch Gardens is claiming that this is the fastest multi-launch coaster in the world. The only problem is they're forgetting about Soaring with Dragon over in China, which was built by the same manufacturer. That goes 78, 5 miles per hour faster. So sorry, Busch Gardens, you almost had this one. There are two inversions on Pantheon. That is what is called a zero-G winder. It's right at the start of the roller coaster after that first launch. And then there's a zero-G stall, which is great to see on an Intamin. This is an element that was first introduced by RMC. And as they've come out with several roller coasters that features that moment, Intamin said, well, let's do our take on it as well. So that's why you have one on this, as well as rides like Velocicoaster. And speaking of Velocicoaster, at least here in America, that's probably the ride I would most closely compare Pantheon to. It's either that or Maverick, and I think this is way more similar to Velocicoaster, which is funny because this was actually supposed to debut before Velocicoaster, but because of the pandemic, this got delayed 2 years. I think everyone would like Pantheon more if this came before Velocicoaster. Both are excellent roller coasters, don't get me wrong, but it's tough to compare when Velocicoaster is a full package, so immersive, and Pantheon is just a good roller coaster. Busch Gardens made little to no attempt to theme this ride, and it is a tragedy. This ride, more so than most, has so much potential when it comes to theming. It's located in the Italy section of the park, which already has some beautifully landscaped areas, and this ride was plopped down in a field, and it does not look great. Don't get me wrong, the colors of the ride are awesome, and the trains look good, but the plaza, queue, and station are abysmal. I'm sorry, but they are. And I think the main problem here comes with budget. If you look in the original animation of Pantheon, you can see where they had original plans to actually put in some good theming, and none of that ended up happening. The only theming that you'll see during this ride is a cool entrance sign, which, okay, great looking sign. And then there's a couple plaques throughout the queue. When you walk along a pathway like this, where it's just wooden fences on either side, it is a crying shame that we don't have some cool Roman columns or some awesome architecture. I mean, the ride is called Pantheon, for Pete's sake, which is a famous building in Rome. You're telling me that this ride could have had a station that looked like the actual Pantheon, and yet we have this box? That is just wasted potential. So we're left with a roller coaster that looks like it was plopped down at Six Flags Park. Except the sad thing is, I think Six Flags would have done a better job theming this. Anyways, when you board your train, you're sitting in these next generation Intamin vehicles. They're very similar to Velocicoasters. Those are elevated a bit more, so your feet don't quite touch the floor. So these you sit a little lower, your feet are flat on the ground. They're very comfortable lap bars, no seat belts or anything. You dispatch out of the station, go through a slow-moving S-bend to start things off. That's when you hit your first launch, and this is a rolling launch. You don't come to a stop first. You just propel straight into that first inversion, which if you ride this when it's a little colder out or it's early in the morning, you're gonna get some crazy hang time on this first element. It's not a fast-paced inversion, but that's okay. We get to the fast portion of the ride just here in a little bit. You bank to the right up against the ground. Pantheon actually has pretty good use of the terrain. This was not exactly flat ground, especially back towards where the drop is, so I appreciate the really low moments on Pantheon. Before you enter your next launch track, you have these slow moving banks where you go first to the right, and then to the left. These are very odd feelings. They're meant to be taken at a slow pace. It's almost reminiscent to the start of Twisted Colossus before you hit the first lift hill, except while those banked in, these bank out. So already very different to every other ride in this park, which is something that I like. And now we hit our main launch section. And I don't think it's fair to call this just one launch section, because really what this is two separate launches in one section of straight track. You accelerate, go over an airtime hill. Wouldn't say there's a ton of airtime here, at least not yet. And then you hit your next launch, which is a boost. That propels you towards the top of the top hat, but you don't quite make it over and you fall back. And we've seen roller coasters that go forwards and backwards through this kind of swing section. I mean, Tempesto is literally across the midway. So guests to Busch Gardens should be pretty familiar with what this sensation is like, except the difference is Tempesto has one gradual launch that you feel the acceleration throughout the entire time. It's consistent. Pantheon boosts you, you coast, and then it boosts you again. It does not feel like one launch section. And I personally have never experienced something like that before. It is very odd, but I like it. I totally dig it. It was one of the things that I was first initially worried about when I heard that they're getting another swing launch coaster. It's like, why would you do that when Tempesto is right there? But I get it now. This feels very different than Tempesto, especially when you consider that there is an airtime hill separating them. And when you go backwards over this hill, oh my gosh, this is some wild ejector airtime. The only comparison I can draw to this is Icebreaker at SeaWorld Orlando, but I think this is more aggressive. I heard someone say once that Pantheon is what happens if Velocicoaster and Icebreaker had a baby, and I feel like that is actually a pretty accurate description of this ride. This back and forth section is similar to Icebreakers, but it's taken to another level. You get wildly ejected over this airtime hill, and then you hit another little bump as you start to speed up backwards. This boost that sends you into the spike is not completely flat, so you get another slight little ejector pop as you're flying backwards, and then you hit your maximum angle. And this is why I recommend the back row, because when you hit the spike, you are so much higher than the rest of the train, you just realize how huge this moment is. I did not expect the spike to be this crazy. You get a very graceful, floaty sensation, then you plunge back down 90 degrees, hit that boost, that airtime hill again, but now you're going forwards, and yes, you get some crazy ejector there, just as forceful as when you were going backwards, only now you can actually see it coming, which I think is why that backwards moment is so crazy. And now you get that final boost into the top hat. If you watch some testing footage of this ride, it flew over the top hat, and that is not the case when we rode it. Now, we did get to experience it in a variety of weather conditions. That includes when it was 45 degrees out, but also when it was almost 80. And it didn't matter. It always went slow over this top hat, which I think is a bit of a shame because I think it has potential for some crazy airtime there, which if you're in the back when you go over this 95-degree drop, you do get good airtime. Don't get me wrong. But I think it could be souped up even more, especially when you're in the front, if it just flew over a little bit faster. So I don't know, maybe during the summer we'll see it doing that. But this drop is great, really fun. Following that is a high-speed curve. This is right alongside the waterfront, real low to the ground, and then you get propelled into the outer bank. And this is pretty slow moving here. This is another moment that was really introduced by RMC. You can see some great examples of this on Steel Vengeance as well as the new Iron Gwazi, but it's a slightly different sensation when you feel it on an Intamin. This stall feels very drawn out, and notice how elevated it is. It's because you slow down a little bit when you hit that top, so you don't fly over this moment, which is something that I would say you do on Steel Vengeance. So there's some nice whip coming out of this moment, but I don't think that it's airtime like you would on some of those RMCs. So for that reason, I think that this outer bank could have been a little better, but I also feel like that might be a little nitpicky. In actuality, it's still a very good moment. You're flying low right up against the ground, banking to the right, and then you flip to hang upside down. And what makes this moment fun is the supports that are directly underneath the track. Or I guess if you're hanging upside down, then that'd technically be above the track. But this train just threads right between them. It's almost a near miss. It's was not the best near miss on the ride, that's still to come. But this stall is very drawn out, more so than others. I think the moment I would best compare it to is probably Goliath at Six Flags Great America. That stall is very elongated, and so is this one. I wouldn't say it's my favorite stall I've ever experienced, but it's just great to get a moment like that out here. You kind of get a taste of it on Twisted Timbers, but that's really the closest you're gonna get in Virginia. I just think stalls are very cool feelings. It's just designed and executed so perfectly that it's very smooth, twisting in and out. And when you exit, you fly underneath the first drop, and you come so close to one of the supports. It's actually the reason that this ride has a maximum height requirement of 6'4", which I don't even think is that tall. I mean, like, yeah, obviously it is tall, but I think it's still a reasonable height to ride a roller coaster. But here, they're enforcing it. I think it more has to do with if you were to extend your arms, you could possibly hit it. I don't know that for a fact, but it's the one part of the ride that I could see clearance being a bit of an issue. Pantheon has a pretty solid ending here. You're once again right up low to the ground, banking to the left. You do a little S-bend, and then you rotate to the right for a little wave turn, and that's what sends you into the brake run. I wouldn't say it's a super pronounced wave turn, nor do you really get any crazy airtime over it. So maybe this element was a little underwhelming. I mean, I can't help but draw a comparison to Iron Gwazi, where that's literally the best moment of the ride is that wave turn. The way that you get ejector airtime over it is crazy, and I just don't think that's the case on Pantheon. But still a fun moment. I appreciate Intamin for branching out and doing something different. Overall, I think Pantheon has a very fun layout. I know right away people are going to be drawing comparisons to other multi-launch coasters, seeing which one is best. I don't think that this ride is as intense as, say, Maverick at Cedar Point. I think the intensity is fairly similar to Velocicoaster, but which one you like more will definitely depend on personal preference. So for Pantheon's final score, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. If I was judging it just based off of the layout, I'd probably give it a 10 out of 10, but because we're talking about the full package and theming isn't very good on this ride at all, that's why I drop it down a point. In my opinion, it's the best roller coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Definitely one of the best rides in Virginia. I think it's a ride that just about anyone could enjoy. It's crazy, but not so crazy that it's going to limit your audience. Pantheon has this gracefulness to it that it's not going to be uncomfortable for most riders, which is why I think this is going to be such a popular attraction. It's definitely something I recommend checking out. Overall, Intamin and Busch Gardens did a great job here. So I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg if you've gotten the chance to ride it? And of course, stay tuned for more coaster reviews here at Coaster Studios, and we'll see you next time.